The Jamil Jivani Show continues on the iHeartRadio Talk Network.
Welcome back to the Jamil Jivani Show on the iHeartRadio Talk Network. We are about to have a conversation I've been looking forward to for some time now about critical race theory. Some of you may have heard of critical race theory in the news. Some of you may have never heard the phrase before. It is something that inspires a very strong reaction out of many people. It is being quite influential in many institutions across our country of Canada, in universities, governments, big businesses. It is shaping how people think about very important stuff. And yet we haven't really had a conversation about what it is and why it is so polarizing for many. So I'm looking forward to this because we're going to bring together a couple of people. They know each other. They're familiar with one another, one of whom is a critic of critical race theory. The other is a supporter of critical race theory. First, we have Dr. Wenyuan Wu, Executive Director at Californians for Equal Rights Foundation. Wenyuan, welcome to the show.
Jamil, thanks for having me on here.
Thank you for joining us. And we are also joined by Sam Hoadley-Brill, PhD student at the City University of New York. Sam, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jamil. I'm a fan, so it's good to be here.
Yeah, really good to have you and appreciate you joining us. So I think the first place I'd like to start with both of you is just giving you a chance to help explain what exactly is critical race theory. And let's try to get some working definition out there before we get to why it is so controversial. Wenyuan, I want to start with you. How would you define and explain critical race theory for people who maybe have heard of it or maybe they haven't heard of it, but they're not exactly sure what it is?
Sure. So, in my opinion, critical race theory is a sub-school of political thought that has its academic roots in theories such as Marxism, neo-Marxism, the Frankfurt School, radical feminism, critical theory, and postmodernism. And it is a contested and explicitly political theory that examines all social relations, economic governance, and policy outcomes through the prism of race. In other words, I am particularly interested in and concerned about critical race theory being an ideological foundation and intellectual justification of the current radical social and racial justice movement, and how it is being propagated from an esoteric academic subject to guide public policies in education, in our workplaces, and in governance.
Sam, how would you define and explain critical race theory for those who may be unaware or maybe they've heard of it but not really clear on what it means?
Yeah, I have a very different conception of what critical race theory is. So I think of critical race theory as an academic movement that is not a monolithic, is not a doctrine by any means. Critical race theorists disagree with one another on many issues. It's a movement that began in law schools. Really is identified originally with the work of the law professor Derek Bell, starting in the 1970s, but really started to pick up steam in the late 80s and the 90s with scholars like Kimberly Crenshaw, Cheryl Harris, Mari Matsuda, Charles Lawrence, and others. With respect to one thing that Dr. Wu mentioned in terms of its intellectual roots, I believe Dr. Wu mentioned radical feminism, Marxism, these sorts of things. I mean, I want to read a quote that comes from a CRT book, Words That Wound, which confirms some of that, but also emphasizes other things. So the scholars write that critical race theory is interdisciplinary and eclectic. It borrows from several traditions, including liberalism, law and society, feminism, Marxism, post-structuralism, critical legal theory, pragmatism, and even nationalism. So I think that there were certain schools of thought left out. One of the things that is definitely worth noting about critical race theory is that it didn't stay confined to law schools. It its main ideas were quickly taken up in neighboring disciplines like sociology, education, and philosophy. So I like to think of the central point of critical race theory as articulated by my professor at the Graduate Center, Charles Mills. He's a philosopher, and he writes that the distinctive virtue of critical race theory is that it tells us to recognize and theorize the centrality of race and white supremacy to the making of the modern world and the implications that has for normative theory and an expanded vision of what needs to be subjected to liberatory critique in order to achieve social justice. So this basically came out of the.
So Sam, I'm gonna pause you. Pause you there because I think that's a good summary of your take on critical race theory and some of the sources that I think would also be supporters of it as a way of looking at the world and analyzing things. So I'll pause you there, and I want to get to a bit of the sort of controversy around this. And Wenyuan, I'm going to start with you because there are states in your country of the United States, Tennessee, Texas, Oklahoma, Arizona, and I believe some others as well, who have started to create a legislative response to critical race theory and prevent it from being taught in schools. That seems like a very big step, and I wonder if you could explain to the listeners why is it so controversial that these sorts of actions are being taken against critical race theory in the United States?
Sure, and you're right about these states introducing state bans or state bills that would ban the teaching of this divisive concepts, racial stereotyping and racial scapegoating, especially in their state's public education classrooms. And also Texas and Arkansas have considered similar bills. And I think it is a hugely important topic of public policy and of policy consequences. So I want to bring the discussion back to examine critical race theory and critical race theory infused policy ideals and also ideologies through a race-based political framework that's informed by critical race theory. It's in my opinion, it is a very narrow. It's a very narrow framework to examine our social relations and our policies, and we're seeing on the ground actions of how critical race theory is informing these dogmatic ideologies of wokeism, anti-racism. For example, in education, we have bills and also bureaucratic programs on the state level rolling out action civics, equitable math, critical ethnic studies, and then in the corporate world and in other workplaces, we are seeing the institution of various diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, racial sensitivity training, white privilege training, and also in local governance, there has been almost a witch hunt for systemic racism to explain racial inequalities or racial disparities in health, wealth, and is of public interest. And it's controversial because not everyone agrees with the assumptions and the policy prescriptions from ideals and ideologies informed by critical race theory. To me, thinking strictly in terms of race is unhelpful because
Wenyuan, I'm gonna pause you here because we're gonna hit a commercial break. But I think that was a helpful explanation from a critical perspective on critical race theory, why it's controversial. When we come back, I will give Sam a chance to respond and to give his take on why critical race theory maybe shouldn't be as controversial in some American states. We'll continue the debate when we come back on iHeartRadio Talk Network.
The Jamil Jivani Show is on the iHeartRadio Talk Network.
Welcome back. Jamil Jivani here with you on the iHeartRadio Talk Network. And we are having a debate, a healthy, civil, intelligent debate, a conversation about critical race theory. Before the break, we were talking about what it is, some of its roots, where does it come from? And then we shifted our gears to why is it so controversial? I'm joined by Dr. Wenyuan Wu, Executive Director at Californians for Equal Rights Foundation, and Sam Hoadley-Brill, PhD student at the City University of New York. Before the break, Wenyuan gave her thoughts on why critical race theory is so controversial to the point where there are actually state governments creating legislation to ban it from being taught in schools. We've also seen, even in the corporate world, multinational corporations like Disney employing critical race theory concepts in their diversity training, recently being called out by a writer by the name of Christopher Rufo of the Manhattan Institute, and Disney is now pulling back from some of their diversity initiatives because of this. So the controversy is real. It's happening. And Sam, I wonder what you would say to explain why is it so controversial?
So what I think that people like Christopher Rufo have been very good at doing is sort of using this label, critical race theory, and using it as a sort of catch-all term for a whole bunch of different trainings, programs, ideas, and really anything that's sort of critical of racism at all can really fall under it. And you actually see this on the website of the organization that Dr. Wu is in charge of. It's claimed that, critical race theory often masquerades under other language like anti-racism and or even any notion of systemic racism is supposed to be critical race theory. So they've done a very good job of marketing the issue and calling all these different things critical race theory. I think it's very strange that the legislation, the whole legislative project, it was actually spearheaded by Rufo himself. And he, as soon as Biden overturned Trump's executive order, which was also inspired by Rufo, Rufo claimed that he was going to launch he was going to continue his one-man war on critical race theory, and he said that he wanted to establish that critical race theory-based programs actually violate the Civil Rights Act and the U.S. Constitution. And so if that's the case, then why would he be promoting any legislation that would ban it at the state level? It would be superfluous. So, that's one issue. There are a whole bunch of other issues that I could get into. But one crucial thing is just the marketing of critical race theory. Even Kimberly Crenshaw back in 2002 said that race scholarship was referred to as critical race theory the way that we refer to tissues as Kleenex.
So, appreciate both of you responding to that question for me. Now I want to play some audio for you. You may have heard this because it did go viral and make the rounds. This is a parent in Loudoun County in Virginia making a response to critical race theory, criticizing it at a school board meeting. I want you both to hear it, and then I'll give you both a chance to give your reactions.
In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Now I have a dream that we will implement love, not hate, or supporting another Jim Crow's agenda. CRT is not an honest dialogue. It is a tactic that was used by Hitler and the Ku Klux Klan on slavery very many years ago to dumb down my ancestors so we could not think for ourselves. CRT is racist. It is abusive. It discriminates against one's color. Let me educate you. An honest dialogue does not oppress. An honest dialogue does not implement hatred or injustice. It's to communicate without deceiving people. Today, we don't need your agreement. We want action and a backbone for what we asked for today, to ban CRT. We don't want your political advertisement to divide our children or belittle them. Think twice before you indoctrinate such racist theories. You cannot tell me what is or is not racist. Look at me. I had to come down here today to tell you to your face that we are coming together and we are strong. This will not be the last. Greet and meet respectfully.
All right, Wenyuan, I'm going to give you about 90 seconds to just share your reaction to what that parent said at the school board meeting in Virginia.
Sure, I actually heard that clip before, and I was very touched by it. And I would like to clarify here that my concern against critical race theory is about to which extent it has guided actual policies in local schools and communities, not critical race theory as a doctoral thesis or academic project. And I would also like to emphasize that the fight against critical race theory and its derivatives is not a conservative crusade. In South Texas, for example, a county that voted for Biden overwhelmingly in 2020 went 70-30 to support school board candidates running on an anti-CRT platform.
Well, yeah, and you're right. It's I think that the emphasis on policy is an important one, and I think that's partly why I'm very glad to have had you both on to talk about this. Sam, I'm going to give you the same, about 90 seconds here. What's your take on this parent at the school board meeting and her criticisms of critical race theory?
I mean, it sounds like she's been consuming a lot of the content that is put forward and propagated by people like Chris Rufo and the people that he's inspired and the people that he's inspired by, like James Lindsay, putting forward, comparisons to the KKK, the very selective usage of Martin Luther King Jr. quote without recognition of the fact that Martin Luther King Jr. himself, utilized the notions of systemic racism. He claimed that Black Americans, quote, discovered that their plight was not a consequence of superficial prejudice, but was systemic. So I think it's just very interesting the way that people are getting their narratives about what critical race theory is and that it's this indoctrination, horrible left-wing plot to destroy society. It's standard conservative conspiracy theory.
Okay, with the last word I want to give to both of you is just to make a recommendation of one resource. Could be a website, could be a book, could be a YouTube video, whatever you think would be helpful for folks listening and want to learn more. Wenyuan, do you want to give us your one recommendation for where people can learn more about critical race theory?
Sure. So my organization has recently put together a booklet on critical race theory to analyze and examine its academic underpinnings and its counterpoints, as well as practical ways parents, community members, and organizations can push back against critical indoctrination and the various dangers of thinking strict in terms of race in our public policies. So check out our website, CSER Foundation.org for that booklet. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Wenyuan. Sam, what would be your one recommendation for a resource for people who want to learn more?
So if people want to genuinely learn about critical race theory, what it actually is in terms of scholarship, then they should check out the book Critical Race Theory, the Key Writings That Formed the Movements, in 1995 volume. But if people want to know about what's going on with critical race theory, the way that it's represented in the media, I recently started a blog called Conceptual Disinformation. So that's conceptualdisinformation.substack.com, where I will be thoroughly debunking and fact-checking claims made by people like Chris Rufo and James Lindsay, specifically on critical race theory, since that's what's in the spotlight right now. And so my first piece is just put up. But
I'm going to have to pause you here, Sam,
yeah.
but I really do appreciate you both joining us, and I hope folks who do want to learn more will check out both the resource recommended by Wenyuan and the resource recommended by Sam. Take care to you both. I hope to have you both back on the show at some point very soon. When we come back after the commercial break, it is time for Mic Drop.